Welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud.
And I'm Art Gelwicks.
Imagine you are just in a DeLorean and it will work.
Yeah.
So, today we are talking about PWAs or progressive web apps. And Art was asking, Did you cover that last week in Anything But Idle? And say, yeah, that was the feature story from Anything But Idle. They were talking about how comparing to last year, PWAs has been increasing in 270% on the installations. That is a
Yeah.
brutality. And PWAs are great. Okay, what it is, it's basically progressive web app, and what it is a website that Chrome, Brave, or Edge allows you to turn into an application. And one of the examples that I have seen, I have seen many, but one of them is Nozbe or Todoist.
Mhm.
And especially cross-platform people, a lot of them or most of them, okay, they're cross-platform because work gives them a device that is incompatible with what you want to have. Okay, it doesn't matter if they give you a Mac, doesn't matter if they give you a PC,
Mhm.
okay, or a Chromebook. The reality is this is the device you got, and now your rest of your life works on a different language. And what happens sometimes with these devices is you can't install things. Okay,
Right.
in the productivity I was talking because of the Apple event last week. I was talking to somebody saying, yeah, I leave OmniFocus because as much as I like OmniFocus, that is a Mac only software, work is always being PC and will always be PC, and it's
Mhm.
always been a struggle. And the web app, it's not as powerful. That is a shortcoming from the people from Omni because they could create a powerful PWA and solve that problem. But what this person did was exactly that. He cannot install anything into that PC without going God knows where to get authorizations. But a PWA is a website.
Yeah.
So he
There's
could install that into that PC. And when he get to his iPhones or Mac or iPad, then he can use the other app and be completely fine. And we are seeing that more and more. Why? For the IT perspective, it's a piece of cake. Okay. You're not putting anything on the machine. It's a web app. I don't need to be that concerned. And I still can limit what you copy and paste to that website. So, but from the and the IT also, I don't need to give you authorizations. I don't need to try to figure it out what it is and what it works and what it's going to be doing and what install. Nothing. But from the user, now it cut that tie of who I know in IT or who I need to ask authorizations to be able to access and use this thing that will help me to do my job better.
now
So
these are not new. I mean, I don't want
no,
anyone to think that progressive web apps are a new idea. The original idea started kicking around 2012. 2015, Google coined the term progressive web apps. It was really a way to do exactly what you're describing, which is to take a website and make it more like an application
mhm,
without requiring the normal download and install of a system or kernel level installer, so that you have application files, you've got a heavy hardware requirement, you've got a heavy storage requirement of your application to be able to provide the functionality. When PWAs first started to come out, though, they were kind of anemic. I mean, they could do very
but I
basic
think that's
things.
where the difference is.
This is where I think we've started to really see a change.
Mhm.
We've seen companies truly get behind the idea of saying, look, we're not going to build standalone Windows applications. We're not going to build standalone Mac applications. We're going to build applications that you run as a PWA. And as a developer, it means that I can focus my development efforts into a single thing. I can deploy updates at a moment's notice. I
Mhm.
don't have to worry about making sure you download the latest version, you install, you have on site licenses, all the normal software baggage is eliminated. And it gives you an opportunity to, if we look, for example, at a Chromebook, I can wipe a Chromebook, power wash it, turn it back on, set my PWAs right back up because they're going to act just as browser tabs for the most part, and I get all my functionality right back. it's a big step in the right direction. Now, are PWAs a replacement to a full desktop machine at this point? No. There's still a lot of applications out there that work better at a desktop level, but they're becoming fewer and fewer. I'll give you an example. Augusto, you were throwing out things like Noseby and Todoist running as PWAs. I actually run Outlook as a PWA because Office 365 allows you to install Outlook as a PWA and run it from the desktop. So I have it on my desktop. I have it pinned to my toolbar. It opens immediately. It has my calendar. It has my contact list. It has all my application interfaces tied to Office 365. And there's no desktop client I have to run. So that piece becomes much more resilient. Now, does it have 100% functionality equivalency to the desktop application? Well, no. Microsoft has that baggage that they have to deal with. And it's the same thing when you look at any of the applications that are coming from a desktop world to a PWA world. There's no way to actually just pick up a desktop app and drop it and turn it into a PWA. Right. You have to build the PWA from the ground up. That's where you start to say, okay, we're going to have this function. We're not going to have this function. And a lot of people will struggle and they'll say, well, the web app isn't as good as the desktop one. I go, well, hold on. How much of that desktop one do you actually use? It's got tons of functionality. Not dissuading you in any stretch about that, but I'm willing to bet there's only about 20 to 30% of that functionality you're using. Well, that's probably in the PWA. And the ability to bring new functionality out in the PWA can be done much faster than they could ever do it at the desktop level, especially in a business environment. Because in a business environment, you've got IT limitations on deploying software updates. Microsoft or somebody goes through and deploys let's say an update to Microsoft Word, something fairly innocuous. That has to go through rigorous testing to make sure it's not going to break anything. But the PWA doesn't have to go through those same channels because it has very basic requirements, because it doesn't actually have code that's living on your machine. It's all running through the browser. And those browser controls are much more manageable by IT from an easier standpoint. They may not be as powerful, but they are more efficient to be able to set up and maintain. So when I look at applications, things like Google Docs, for example, Google Docs is a great example of an application that works really well as a PWA. I mean, it's really a piece of cake to do that. You can go through, you can create the app, tie it to your taskbar or whatever, pop it open, get to work right away. Matter of fact, one of the tips that we were going to share this week is related to Google Docs. One of the ones that I know a lot of people have forgotten about. If you go into Chrome and in the URL bar, instead of typing in, docs, whatever, and then going and hitting new, if you just type in docs.new and hit enter, it will open Google Docs and it will start you in a new document. That easy. It's very simple, very streamlined. Same thing, I believe, also for Sheets. That type of a thing you can't do with a desktop app because you're not living in that space. This also, though, PWAs really tie into our whole idea of cross-platform capability, because I can use this on my desktop. I can use this on a borrowed desktop. I can use it on my Chromebook. I can go and grab this wherever, as long as I have a capable browser, which is where some of this falls down a little bit when we get to the mobile device level. I'm in good shape. I can go in and do exactly what I need to do and not have to worry about what the load is. There's also some arguments to be made that you get better battery life on devices because you're not running as much processor level intensive activity for desktop applications versus browser applications. You can have more running at the same time because, for example, Edge as a browser now has functionality that if you have a tab that's inactive for a period of time, it'll actually put that tab to sleep and cut down its processor utilization. So all the optimizations we get at the browser level carry over to the PWAs. So with PWAs, and I know you guys talked about this a little bit. With Noseby, with Todoist, what have you found are the limitations? What
The
would be the
limitations
stopping
are
place?
around the developer and what the developer have things that require, longer um, processing power. But for example, things like Nozbe, things like Todoist, probably Google Docs, you will not see it. Anything that the limitation with the PWA is going to be the same limitation that you have in the web browser. So it's a matter of what the developer designed, and as working with developers, they will tell you, oh no, everything that doesn't work is by design, because that's
Yeah, there are no bugs. They're just
there are no bugs.
undocumented
That's
features.
by design. So, but the reality is, you know, that's going to be your limitation. The other thing that is cool is the footprint you leave behind on that machine is
Mhm.
little, almost non-existent.
That's a big one. That is really a big one, and I think it opens up a unique opportunity to being an IT person. I can define systems now around a much smaller footprint of device. I don't need big iron to do it. And if I need to wipe a device, okay, not a big deal. Your machine blows up, you leave it on top of the car and you pull away and it slides off. It's not that crisis that it was. And this is part of that merger and that promise that we've had for so long with cloud-based computing to be able to have this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that does raise a question, though. A lot of people will have this issue. Well, wait, what do I do if I'm not connected? Well, that's actually not as much of a problem with PWAs because PWAs are actually installed into the browser. You can use it in many cases without the connection. Google Docs, for example, or Google Drive and Google Docs, you have the ability to go in and flag things for offline use. And it makes copies of them into local storage and then synchronizes your modifications in the background. Things like OneNote. OneNote has the same type of capabilities. Again, they're not perfect by any stretch, but for the bulk of the work that you do, it gives you those opportunities. Now, I challenge in many cases, oh, well, what do I do if I'm not connected? My first question is, okay, so how often are you actually truly not connected?
Right.
There are some roles that there's no question they wind up in offline modes. Yeah, it happens. I get it.
It happens, but it's going to be so little on these days.
And that's really the case is it will become and continue to become less and less frequent. So, for example, if I have someone who is running Office 365, I'll ask concertedly, well, do you really need the desktop apps? Do we really need to install desktop Word, desktop Excel, desktop PowerPoint? And there are arguments to be made for those. Do you really need the desktop version of Outlook? No, probably not. That's kind of an easy one for me. I think in many cases that's an easy one. But it opens up a unique opportunity, I think, to remap the platform that you're building around a less intrusive design and less intrusive choices. Here's the other thing that I love about PWAs, though. They're great to just try something out.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go in and try out a piece of software and they have it available as a PWA, great. Go in, create an account, install the PWA, try it out. If you don't like it, you delete it. It's that easy. There's very little baggage left behind. It's pretty much self-cleaning in most cases. So there are very few downsides that I've seen aside from limited functionality. And I think that's where PWAs will continue to run into a bit of a brick wall for quite some time, is not even so much the limited functionality, it's comparative functionality. When a company releases a PWA related to an existing desktop level product, that becomes problematic. Not because it can't be done, It's because everyone will have the expectations that the two items or the two solutions have feature parity from day one. And I've never seen one have that. It just, you can't, because in many cases, the desktop applications are leveraging operating system level hooks that you just can't provide through the limitations of a browser.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the different applications, you mentioned Noseby, you mentioned Todoist. Are there any other PWAs that you use frequently?
I don't, but I work on the iPad. Okay, but I have seen basically Google, Gmail, um, all the basic things, and really there are so many companies coming to this because not only that, think about it from the developer perspective. It's a painful that to develop the Apple machine and then go develop the Mac machine and then the Chromebook. This way, you know, it's harder. So you could make it this way much easier.
Yeah, as we're sitting here talking, just to try it out, I went into office.com, I went into, clicked on Word, created a new blank document, and then in Chrome, just went to the little 3 dot more button and said under more tools, create shortcut. And it asked me, do I want to create that shortcut in its own window?
Mm-hmm.
And I basically have an app. I've now pinned it to my taskbar, and I now have Word as an app. That's not truly the definition of a PWA, but it acts like an app. It works like an app. It's a web-based application, so it's pretty darn close into it. And that type of a thing, I think, really sets the tone for this. And again, if you look at the application work that's being done on these tools, software developers are recognizing the value of developing one product and being able to, if this is a little inside baseball, if you're in software development, this idea of continuous delivery becomes key. The Agile project management methodology includes this concept of not just creating a version and building to a version, but continuously deploying new features, new functionality, bug fixes in a rolling deployment so that your users are always getting the types of things that they're looking for, that they've asked for. They don't have to wait for this massive software update, which can often be very disruptive. Now, that said, it does remind me of one problem I do have with PWAs and web-based applications in general. And that's often that functionality will be updated or changed without clear communication to the end users. That happens a lot, where you'll go in and something's different and you weren't expecting it to be different.
Correct.
There was one recently, Notion, which I use all the time, did something minor. They have a dark mode. You have a light mode and a dark mode, as most apps do now. Their dark mode was this really dark gray, but it wasn't actually, black as most dark modes are. Well, they made a change. They changed it to an actual black background. They just didn't tell anybody they were doing it. Now, it was dark mode. They just made dark mode darker. But there was a lot of pushback in the community immediately saying, hey, what happened? Is my thing broken? And it's not a matter of it being a good feature or a bad feature. It was an unexpected change. And I think that's one of the things that any software developer who's working on a PWA or working with PWAs needs to keep in mind that they absolutely have to maintain an open channel of communication to their user base anytime they modify anything. Because, and this is what drives IT departments nuts, changes can happen and they're not prepared to mitigate the backlash or the feedback or the impact of those changes. And that's what often IT departments will say, well, wait, we're not going to use that because we can't control it, which there is something to be said for a controlled rollout of functionality. So if you're not going to maintain that control for other people, you got to kind of do it yourself.
Well, and it is interesting because as you ask me which other apps you use, you make me think, what else do I use? And I say, oh, of course, I'm in the iPad all day. I don't use PWAs. So I
So, can
the
you?
iPad, as far as I know, you cannot do PWAs still.
That's what I think is interesting, and maybe that's a Safari limitation.
It
Um,
is.
with PWAs do have a natural, I want to say, bottom to what they're doing. When you look at things like Word, like Outlook, those types of PWAs, they don't really lend themselves to a mobile structure. They like to be on an emulated or equivalent landscape style
Mhm.
layout. They'll work on a portrait layout, but if we think about most of our mobile devices, we spend the bulk of the time in a portrait configuration. So if somebody's going to write a PWA that's going to be compatible all the way down and all the way up, that's a lot more to take into consideration. So PWAs really, when you think about it, are equivalents to desktop applications. They're not equivalent to mobile apps. There are mobile versions. There's a mobile version, right off the top of my head. I can go into Outlook on Chrome on my phone and use it. And it works
Correct.
and it does its things. But again, there are things that the native apps can do that we still cannot do with PWAs. There are interfaces that require operating system level access and permissions that the browser just is not granted. And in many cases, rightfully so. You don't want to give total freedom of access to your browser because it can be, taken advantage of for nefarious purposes. So it's going to be a while till we're able to cross that bridge.
It is going to be a while, and it's not. iPads, for example, are out. They cannot do it. Chromebooks can, obviously, but iPads cannot. And I think the reason is because Apple Jet has improved, but it's not a real Chromebook, a real Chrome version. What you have on the iPad, and I think that's the reason that's works that way.
So PWAs, good thing. We're recommending that people look at them,
I
them
think
into
they are an
consideration.
incredible thing. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that, as a cross-platform person, I think PWAs are an extremely powerful part of my toolbox. And before I invest money in buying a dedicated desktop application, I should look and see if there are equivalent levels of functionality available through PWAs and web-based services. From that standpoint, I find it works better. At least it's easier to change your mind with a PWA than
Mhm.
it is than that desktop purchase and install.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
All right.
And well, with this, we have reached the end. Follow us where you like to listen to podcasts and like us, subscribe to us, or leave us a review. You can also interact with us in personalproductivity.club. We have a channel there. We are Augusto Pinaud and Art Gelwicks. See you next time from your favorite device.